So we're here at Devday.lk, the new conference in Sri Lanka for software developers. And I'm Johannes Broadwell, and with me today is Naresh Jain, who is one of our speakers and also the founder, I think, of Agile India. It's good to have you here, Naresh.
Same here, Johannes. Thanks for inviting me.
So you gave two talks today. One was called The Avatars of TDD, and the other one was about the testing pyramid. Yep. So what's an avatar?
An avatar is an Indian word for incarnation. So my idea was that there are different incarnations or different kind of styles of doing test-driven development. Wanted to be a little more philosophical, so I didn't use the word style and I chose the word avatars.
So what are some of those differences?
So broadly I classify in the outside in and the inside out, and then I go into, even in inside out and outside in, there are various different variations depending on, whether you're doing unit tests, whether you're doing acceptance tests, whether you're doing state-based or interaction-based. So there's a kind of a grid that I draw up which talks about all these different factors that influence your incarnation or your style of test-driven development.
So have you done any research as to how many people are in each style and things like this?
So this was inspired by an event that occurred at Uppsala conference, where I was kind of participating in the design fest, and I chose to quit it and then start doing test-driven development myself on the problem. I paired with people over the years and kind of figured out that there are actually very different styles of doing test-driven development. I think back then it was pretty common that if you worked with someone and you didn't follow their style of test-driven development, then they would say you're wrong. You don't know test-driven development. Mm-hmm. And the whole reason behind this quest for me was to kind of highlight that first understand myself that actually there are different styles of doing test-driven development, and secondly highlight to people that it's okay not to have the exact same style of test-driven development, because there are a lot of these different variations. I think these days it's a well accepted fact that there are different styles of doing test-driven development, but at least back in 2006, 2007, I think there was a lot of debate about there is one true way of doing test-driven development.
So you said you were pairing with a lot of different people. So what would you say were the people who were furthest apart in their style?
I think there were a lot of different people with different styles. I remember pairing with Venkat on a flight, and one of the things I saw him doing, which was quite unique that I didn't see anybody else do, was basically he took the problem and tried to distill it down by saying, oh, this is noise, this is noise, that was quite interesting. I paired with Corey Haynes. In fact, Corey Haynes was one of the very earliest guys that I paired with. He and I used to hang around at the SDT con, that's the Simple Design and Testing Conference. And his style was kind of quite similar to my style, where we would start with a behavior as the test, and then we would write everything in the test itself. Until we figured out, okay, there is this set of things that can be pulled out as an object.
So that's in the same thing as, I think it was a TDD as if you really mean it?
Keith Braid's TDD as you mean it. I've actually never attended one. I've heard from other people, so I'm not exactly sure. But I'm assuming it's quite similar. Ron Jeffries was another interesting thing. I mean, most people know Ron Jeffries' style now. Like, he would write things on the card that he found interesting. So he would basically write one thing, one entity that interested him on a separate card, and he would have a big set of cards piled up, and then he would say, okay, this is kind of the central part of the system, and so I'm going to start with this.
So would that be an inside-out approach?
Yeah, so that would be what I qualify as an inside-out approach. Starting with what is the crux and kind of fleshing out the system.
Right. And what you described with starting with the behavior, that would be an outside-in approach?
It depends where you're framing your behavior. Right. So for example, if you're like the one we did with the coffee vending machine today, yes, where I'm framing the behavior purely from treating the system as a black box and someone interacting with the system, I would call that as an outside-in way of doing it. But I could say I want to focus on this very little element inside this, and that's the behavior I'm interested in. Like if I'm building an anti-spam server, then the thing I'm interested in is the ability to mark something as a ham or a spam, and then kind of flesh out different criterias which will qualify it as a ham or a spam.
But in that case, doing the whole email handling, so the whole behavior is not so interesting because
Correct.
you're only interested
in this. You're not looking at MX records, you're not looking at any of that stuff, and just focusing on the crux of it.
So just to make it a little bit broader for those who are not familiar with test-driven development, I think that your coffee machine was a very nice example of how to think in terms of test-driven development. So for a non-programmer or someone who's not familiar with TDD, could you explain how the vending machine example works?
So the key thing that I try to do with the vending machine example is the moment we say test-driven development, people kind of get all excited and they say, okay, we're going to start writing a test which is going to tell us what the system needs to do, and then they're going to write code to make that test pass. And a lot of times they end up writing tests that don't essentially make sense in that case, right? So with this example, what I really try to do is to first talk about, hey, let's test out what our idea or how we perceive the coffee vending machine will be used by someone using a low fidelity prototype. And so I draw up, and then we do a little bit of interaction designing or design testing through that.
So your TDD cycle actually starts with interaction, with drawing a sketch of the user interface.
In this particular case, because it is quite important to understand the interaction with this component, right? And I think that's quite central to a coffee vending machine. But in other cases, it might be about trying to articulate what you've been thinking about it in form of an executable specification or an executable test, which you can then further build to essentially drive your design.
So it is about expressing the requirements in terms of a task that then drives your design. So that's what you're getting at when you're using the outside-in approach and the test driving, as opposed to, so you had a driving or
validating your design. So in a lot of contexts, I already have a design kind of preconceived in my mind, which is not necessarily bad. A lot of people will tell you you're doing TDD wrong if you have that. I think you could have that. You could have a design preconceived in your mind, and then you use your test to validate the design and let the design evolve in your head. And so, those are another parameter in the quadrant that, in the spectrum that I was talking earlier.
Right. So that's one of the other avatars of, or one of the other qualities.
Qualities that would influence your avatar.
Exactly.
Yeah.
All right. And your other talk was about the testing pyramid. What's the testing pyramid?
It's about given all the different styles of different types of tests that we have that we can write, where should you focus most effort and energy on, and how do you lay it out? So I think representing it in terms of a testing pyramid gives us quite a few advantages of talking about what is the base where you should put maximum effort, and we talk about starting with unit test and then kind of if it's a simple system, then it's unit test, acceptance test, and end-to-end test. But as you work into large, complicated systems, then there are more layers of tests that kick in. So we talk about business layer acceptance testing, or basically business logic acceptance. Then we talk about workflow. Then we talk about integration. Integration not in the sense of integration with third party, but integration in a larger system. Like if you're in a bank, then your system is interoperating with Swift and with a lot of other protocols inside the bank. So it's about integrating with those systems and stuff like that. Yeah.
I've found that the term integration test is used in quite different contexts in different settings.
In general, tests are something that's so badly used, so loosely used, that we tend to call anything and everything a test. And I think Michael Bolton, one of the things I was trying to highlight, kind of makes this distinction between checking and testing.
Yes.
And I think that's quite interesting, because a lot of people make the statement that everything can be automated. And I think when you qualify it by saying all checks can be automated, people understand it. But when you say everything can be automated, it's too open-ended statement to make.
So what cannot be automated?
Things that you don't know, things that you need to probe the system to figure out what's going to happen, right? And that needs probing, which by nature cannot just be automated.
What do you mean by probing in this case?
What do I mean by probing? So let's say you give me the system and you tell me this is the functionality of the system. So there are a bunch of things that I can automate because those are things I understand. I can click, right? There is a sound that's going to have, I can throw this and it probably is going to crack. But there are things around, how much pressure it would handle before it starts cracking, or before, how do I unlock this? How do I open this? How do I dismantle this? That would require me to probe a little bit. That would require me to understand a little bit.
Right. So the things where you know that there might be a threshold, but you don't know what the threshold is.
I might not know the threshold, or I might not even know that this is something that's breakable.
What about usability? Is that also one of those areas where you probe, or is that a different thing altogether?
I look at usability as a spectrum, and I think there are certain things in usability that can be automated and figured out. There are other things that you need to probe, and you need to get different people to play around with the system to understand, and you can do A/B tests and things like that to zero in on what's working for a larger set of people.
So an A/B test would be whether this or another bell would be most used, most liked, most effective.
Well, what would be the design of this thing? Should it be this big, or should it be this big, or just getting your hand closer to the bell should ring it? I mean, those were all open questions which we need to figure out.
And you cannot automate that, finding that answer without putting people in the loop.
Yeah, so what we were trying to demonstrate today is there's some amount of it that can be figured out by using low fidelity prototypes or other kinds of techniques, but there are still quite a few things that you actually have to put in front of people to realize, especially anything that has some kind of a workflow, that has some kind of interop with other kinds of systems. Those are generally harder to figure it all up front.
So about the conference, how are you liking the Devday.lk conference?
For a first-time conference, I think it's pretty awesome. I'm very impressed. I've been organizing conferences myself for many years, and looking at the team putting this conference together, I know we've been interacting a little bit earlier on to kind of see how to conceive this conference and stuff like that. From those days till what I see in reality is just been like brilliant. I mean, I think it's fantastic.
And is it your first visit to Sri Lanka?
Yes, it is my first visit to Sri Lanka. I've always seen it on the map. Now I'm here.
And what do you think of the country?
I've been very impressed with what I've seen so far. So before coming here to the conference, I spent 2 days down in the south, and I was impressed with all the beautiful countryside. Beautiful countryside, the lakes, and then the sea and stuff like that. Also quite intimidated by just how people interact here. I mean, it's quite different from what I had thought, and that's why I guess I'm using the word intimidated, and
So
also
how's it
intrigued
different?
at the same time. Like I want to understand more of it.
So what's the difference?
I guess it has to do with just how, I don't see a lot of, or at least I don't read a lot of expressions on people's faces when they're communicating. At least in India, in India, at least people make it fairly visible, like their expressions, or at least I understand them. Here I don't. So when I've been talking to people, at least when I was traveling, I don't know when they tell me this is what they want to charge, and I try to offer a different price. I just can't read from their faces whether they're happy about it, whether they're not. So things like that. I'm just like intrigued by trying to understand what's going on in their mind.
So are you planning on coming back?
Certainly, yeah. I think it's a good place, both for work in terms of the conference and other things, and also for pleasure. I think it's a beautiful place to be.
Great. So are you ready for the lightning round?
Lightning round.
Yes. So what we'll do is I have some questions, and I want you to answer them as quickly as you can. When you're done answering, you ring the bell.
All right.
So, should we practice?
Is the thing to break the bell or just ring the bell? All right.
I think that
I
we're
got
going to have it within reason. All right. So, what is an integration test?
Integration test is to figure out if two endpoints can communicate with each other.
Should I write tests?
Depends on your context.
Do you write tests for the Agile India website?
0.
Ooh. Which types of tests are the most important?
Depends on the context, but I would put good weightage on unit tests and on acceptance tests.
What's the best conference to go to these days?
That's a hard question. It really depends what you're trying to get at. I mean, if there are conferences which kind of take a deep down, and there are conferences which give you the breadth, so depending on which you're looking for. I think with the Agile India, we're kind of going more breadth, more this thing. So if that's what you're looking for, then you should come to the Agile India conference.
And finally, what is deliberate practice?
What is deliberate practice? The way I explain, at least to people in India, is that what does Sachin Tendulkar do every day in the morning, right? And everyone knows that every day Sachin Tendulkar is practicing in the nets. But he's not just playing any stroke, or he's not just like there doing anything. He feels like there is a very specific goal he has, and he's just deliberately, repeatedly practicing that with a single goal in mind, is to improve a particular technique. And I think as software professionals, we don't quite do our time in the nets. We are generally playing small league matches after league matches and never get to the World Cup, because we are just so caught up in playing these little league matches that we never improve on our skills, never deliberately focus on a specific skill to improve them. So that's a long version of a lightning talk of what deliberate practice is.
Thank you. I think that is the signal that our interview is at an end. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.